The silence was the worst part. They'd stopped yelling, stopped throwing insults, and just stared at me like I was a stain they couldn't scrub out. My hands trembled, the cheap silverware digging into my palms, but I refused to look away. This was it. The moment everything changed. The moment I realized the people I called family saw me as nothing. If you have a mother, father, brother, or sister, subscribe now and share this story of family betrayal. It had started so predictably, another Sunday dinner at my parents' house. The air always thick with tension, a simmering pot of unspoken resentments threatening to boil over. My older brother Ethan sat across from me, his usual smirk plastered on his face. He was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I, on the other hand, was Aubrey, just Aubrey, the disappointment, the constant reminder of what they wished they hadn't gotten. My mother, a woman who measured love in achievements and social standing, barely acknowledged my presence. Her attention focused solely on Ethan's latest promotion at his law firm. My father, a man of few words and even fewer emotions, just sat there, a silent judge in his own twisted court. I'd always felt like an outsider in my own family, a perpetual guest waiting to be dismissed. But tonight felt different. There was a weight in the air, a palpable sense of impending doom that made my stomach churn. The conversation drifted aimlessly for a while, a shallow stream of polite inquiries and boastful pronouncements. Then my mother cleared her throat, a signal that something significant was about to be said. "Aubrey," she began, her voice dripping with a saccharine sweetness that I knew was a prelude to something nasty. "Your father and I have been discussing your situation." My heart pounded in my chest. My situation. What did that even mean? I'd been working as a freelance graphic designer for the past few years, making a decent living and finally feeling like I was finding my own path. But to my parents, anything short of a corporate ladder climb was a failure. "We think it's time you started being realistic about your future," my father chimed in, his voice devoid of any warmth. "This hobby of yours isn't going to get you anywhere." Ethan snickered, and I shot him a look that could curdle milk. He just shrugged as if to say, "Don't look at me, I'm just enjoying the show." That's when my mother dropped the bomb. "Honestly, Aubrey, sometimes I think you were just a family mistake." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. A family mistake. All the years of feeling inadequate, of constantly striving to earn their approval, culminated in that single devastating phrase. My vision blurred, and I gripped the silverware tighter, trying to maintain some semblance of composure. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to shatter the carefully constructed facade of their perfect family. But I didn't, I couldn't. I was too stunned, too hurt to do anything but sit there and absorb the blow. I managed to choke out a shaky, "Excuse me," and pushed myself away from the table. I ran upstairs to my old bedroom, the room I hadn't occupied in years but still felt like a prison. I grabbed my backpack, stuffed a few belongings inside, and rummaged through my purse, finding a grand total of $42. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me started. As I walked out the front door, I heard my mother's voice calling after me, "Don't be dramatic, Aubrey, you'll be back." But I knew I wouldn't. Not this time. I walked away without looking back, the words "family mistake" echoing in my head, fueling a fire of anger and resentment that would burn for years to come. They thought they'd broken me. They were wrong. They had merely set me free. The next few years were a blur of cheap apartments, ramen noodles, and endless hustle. I worked odd jobs, took on freelance gigs, and slowly, painstakingly, built a life for myself. I poured all my energy into my work, honing my skills and building a portfolio that would eventually open doors I never thought possible. I cut off all contact with my family, severing the ties that had bound me to their toxic world. I changed my phone number, blocked them on social media, and moved to a different city, determined to create a new identity, one that wasn't defined by their expectations or their judgments. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, of loneliness, of wondering if I had made the right decision. But then I would remember my mother's words, "family mistake," and the fire would reignite, pushing me forward, driving me to prove them wrong. And slowly but surely I did. My graphic design work started to gain recognition. I landed a few high-profile clients, and my income steadily increased. I moved into a nicer apartment, bought a car, and started to enjoy the fruits of my labor. I even started dating a kind, supportive man named David, who saw me for who I was, not for who my parents wanted me to be. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control, like I was finally living on my own terms. But even as I built a successful and fulfilling life, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business. The pain of my past still lingered, a dull ache that refused to go away. I knew that one day, I would have to confront my family, to show them what I had become, to prove that I was anything but a mistake. I just didn't know when, or how, that day would come. Then one rainy Tuesday morning, I received a phone call from an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment, then answered it, bracing myself for the worst. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Aubrey, is that you?" The voice on the other end was weak and trembling, but I recognized it instantly. It was my mother. My heart skipped a beat. "Yes, this is Aubrey," I replied, my voice cold and distant. "What do you want?" There was a long pause, and I could hear my mother struggling to compose herself. "Aubrey, we need your help," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your father, he's sick, very sick." I felt a pang of guilt, but I quickly suppressed it. After everything they had done to me, they expected me to just drop everything and come running to their rescue. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said flatly, "but I don't see how that concerns me." "Please, Aubrey," my mother pleaded. "We have no one else. Ethan can't help us." "Ethan, the golden child, what could have happened?" "What do you mean Ethan can't help you?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. My mother hesitated again, then let out a sob. He's in trouble, Aubrey, big trouble. He's facing serious jail time and he's gambled away everything. We've lost the house, everything." The pieces started to fall into place. Ethan's perfect life had crumbled, and my parents, desperate and alone, were turning to the family mistake for help. The irony was almost too much to bear. But even as I felt a sense of satisfaction, a tiny voice inside me whispered, "This is your chance, Aubrey, your chance to finally even the score." "I'll think about it," I said, my voice carefully controlled. "But I'm not making any promises." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment to decide if I would succumb to bitterness and resentment, or if I would rise above it and forge my own path to redemption. What I didn't know was that the choice I was about to make would not only change my life, but would also expose a web of lies and betrayals that would shatter my family forever. The person I trusted most was one of them. The phone call replayed in my head for days, a broken record of desperation and guilt. Sleep became a luxury I could barely afford, replaced by endless replays of my mother's voice and the gnawing question of what to do. On one hand, I wanted to slam the door shut, to let them wallow in the mess they had created. They had made their choice, hadn't they? They had declared me a family mistake and cast me aside. Why should I lift a finger to help them now? But on the other hand, a flicker of empathy, a stubborn remnant of the love I once felt, refused to be extinguished. My father was sick. Ethan was in trouble. And my mother, the woman who had so callously dismissed me, was begging for my help. It was a twisted, cruel irony, but it was also an opportunity. An opportunity to prove them wrong, to show them that I was not the weak, pathetic person they had always believed me to be. An opportunity, perhaps, for revenge. I started digging, using my skills to uncover the truth behind Ethan's downfall. It didn't take long to find a trail of bad investments, gambling debts, and shady deals that had landed him in hot water with some very dangerous people. The more I learned, the more I realized the extent of his recklessness, the depth of his self-inflicted wounds. And the more I understood, the more conflicted I became. He was still my brother, after all, despite everything that had happened between us. Could I really stand by and watch him lose everything? Could I watch my parents suffer the consequences of his actions? I decided to visit my parents, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation. The house was a shell of its former self, the once manicured lawn overgrown, the paint peeling, the air thick with neglect. My mother answered the door, her eyes red and swollen, her face etched with worry. She looked older, weaker than I remembered. "Aubrey," she said, her voice cracking. "Thank you for coming." I stepped inside, the familiar surroundings triggering a flood of memories, both good and bad. The living room was cluttered with unopened mail and unpaid bills, a stark contrast to the pristine order I remembered from my childhood. My father was sitting in his armchair, his face gaunt and pale, a network of wrinkles I hadn't noticed before now dominating his features. He looked up as I entered, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and gratitude. "Aubrey," he croaked, his voice barely audible. I. I don't know what to say. I sat down on the edge of the sofa, trying to maintain a neutral expression. Tell me everything, I said, my voice flat. Tell me about Ethan. Tell me about the money. Tell me about what's really going on. They told me everything, laying bare the full extent of their problems. Ethan's gambling addiction, his failed business ventures, his mounting debts. My father's declining health, his inability to work, his dwindling savings. The loss of their house, their possessions, their security. As they spoke, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Pity, anger, resentment, and a grudging sense of responsibility. They were my family, after all, no matter how dysfunctional, and they were in desperate need of help. I knew that I could help them, that I had the resources and the skills to pull them back from the brink. But I also knew that doing so would come at a cost. It would mean forgiving them, forgetting the past, and opening myself up to the possibility of being hurt again. It would mean sacrificing my own peace of mind for the sake of their well-being. I told them I needed time to think, to weigh my options. I left their house feeling more confused and conflicted than ever. The weight of their problems settled on my shoulders, a heavy burden that threatened to crush me. I spent the next few days in a haze of indecision, torn between my desire for revenge and my sense of obligation. I talked to David, seeking his advice and support. He listened patiently, offering words of encouragement and reminding me of my own strength and resilience. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, Aubrey, he said, his eyes filled with love and concern. But whatever you decide, make sure it's for you. Make sure it's what will bring you peace. His words resonated with me, giving me a new perspective on the situation. It wasn't about revenge or forgiveness or even about helping my family. It was about choosing my own path, about defining my own values, about deciding what kind of person I wanted to be. I realized that the only way to truly break free from the past was to let go of the anger and resentment that had been consuming me for so long. To forgive my parents, not for their sake, but for my own. To move on with my life, without being haunted by the ghosts of yesterday. I decided to help them, but on my terms. I would use my resources to pay off their debts, to provide them with medical care, to secure a safe and stable living situation. But I would also set boundaries, establishing clear expectations for their behavior and refusing to tolerate any further abuse or manipulation. And I would do it all without expecting anything in return, without seeking their approval or validation. I would do it because it was the right thing to do, because it was what would bring me peace. But this was far from over. I laid awake that night, staring at the ceiling, the offer to help hanging heavy in the air. It felt like a trap, a gilded cage baited with guilt and obligation. Every scenario played out in my head, me swooping in to save the day, only to be met with the same dismissive glances and subtle digs. Or worse, becoming their caretaker, sacrificing my hard-won freedom for a family that had never truly valued me. The more I thought about it, the more the resentment bubbled up, threatening to consume me. I got out of bed, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights, each one a tiny beacon of hope and possibility. Was I really going to let my family's dysfunction dictate my future? Was I going to allow their negativity to poison the life I had so carefully constructed? The answer, I realized, was no. But simply cutting them off wasn't enough. I needed to do more than just survive. I needed to thrive. The next morning, I called my parents and told them I would help. But I had conditions. I would pay off their debts and find them a new place to live, a modest apartment far from their old life of excess. I would arrange for my father's medical care, ensuring he had the best possible treatment. But I would not give them cash. I would control the purse strings, ensuring the money was used responsibly and not squandered on gambling or other reckless pursuits. And I would require them to seek therapy, both individually and as a family, to address the underlying issues that had plagued them for so long. My mother agreed, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. My father simply grunted his assent, his pride clearly wounded. I hired a lawyer to draw up the necessary paperwork, ensuring that everything was legally binding and that I was protected from any future liabilities. I contacted a real estate agent and found a small, affordable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I arranged for my father to see a team of specialists who quickly diagnosed him with a serious illness that required immediate treatment. As I worked to untangle their mess, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Ethan was strangely silent, absent from the entire process. My parents offered vague excuses, claiming he was too ashamed to face me. But I suspected there was more to it than that. I decided to pay him a visit, tracking him down to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. The room was a disaster, littered with empty bottles and discarded clothing. Ethan was lying on the bed, his eyes bloodshot, his face pale and gaunt. He looked like a shadow of his former self, the confident, arrogant brother I had once known replaced by a broken, defeated man. "What do you want, Aubrey?" he slurred, his voice thick with intoxication. "I came to see how you were doing," I said, my voice carefully neutral, "and to ask you a few questions." He laughed, a hollow, mirthless sound. "About what? My spectacular downfall." "About the money," I said, my eyes narrowing. "About the gambling debts, about what really happened." He hesitated, then took a long swig from a bottle of something that smelled like cheap alcohol. "What's there to tell?" he said, shrugging. "I screwed up, big deal." "That's not what I hear," I said, stepping closer. "I hear you owe a lot of money to some very dangerous people, people who don't take kindly to being cheated." His eyes widened and he started to sweat. "Who told you that?" he stammered. "Let's just say I have my sources," I replied, my voice low and menacing. "Now tell me the truth. What exactly did you do?" He finally cracked, confessing to a series of increasingly desperate schemes to try and recoup his losses. He had borrowed money from loan sharks, forged signatures, and even embezzled funds from his law firm. He was in deep and he knew it. But then he revealed something that made my blood run cold. He hadn't just lost his own money. He had lost my parents' money too. He had convinced them to invest their life savings in a series of fraudulent schemes, promising them huge returns. And when those schemes collapsed, they lost everything. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Ethan's recklessness. It was about betrayal. He had deliberately targeted my parents, exploiting their trust and leaving them financially ruined. And he had done it all for his own selfish gain. The rage inside me reached a boiling point. My vision blurred, and I had to clench my fists to keep from lashing out. I wanted to make him pay, to make him suffer the consequences of his actions. But I knew that violence wouldn't solve anything. It would only make things worse. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "You're going to fix this, Ethan," I said, my voice cold and hard. "You're going to confess everything to the authorities. You're going to tell them about the embezzlement, the fraud, everything, and you're going to cooperate fully with their investigation." He looked at me, his eyes filled with fear and desperation. "You can't do that, Aubrey," he pleaded. "You'll ruin me. I'll go to jail for years." "That's the point, Ethan," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "You deserve to go to jail. You deserve to pay for what you've done." I walked out of the motel room, leaving him to wallow in his misery. As I drove away, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The scales were finally starting to balance. But I knew that this was just the beginning. The real reckoning was yet to come. The person I trusted most was one of them. I smiled. I acted broken. But I was recording everything. The revelation of Ethan's deceit hit me like a physical blow. My brother, the golden child, had not only destroyed his own life but had deliberately dragged my parents down with him, motivated by greed and a stunning lack of empathy. The desire for simple payback was quickly eclipsed by something colder, more calculated. This wasn't about evening the score, it was about dismantling their entire charade, exposing the rot that festered beneath their perfect facade. I knew I couldn't simply hand Ethan over to the authorities and walk away. That would be too easy, too clean. He had to face the full consequences of his actions, and my parents needed to understand the depth of his betrayal. I started meticulously documenting everything. Every conversation, every financial transaction, every lie they had ever told me. I reactivated old email accounts, scoured social media, and even hired a private investigator to dig into their past. The more I uncovered, the more disgusted I became. My parents weren't the innocent victims they portrayed themselves to be. They had enabled Ethan's behavior for years, turning a blind eye to his reckless spending and questionable business dealings. They had fostered a culture of entitlement and deceit, creating the monster that now threatened to consume them all. As I gathered evidence, I began formulating a plan, a strategy that would not only expose their lies but would also protect myself from any potential fallout. I knew that Ethan would likely try to blame me for his troubles, to paint me as the vengeful sibling who was out to destroy the family. And my parents, desperate to salvage their reputation, might be willing to corroborate his story. I needed to be one step ahead of them, to anticipate their every move, and to ensure that the truth prevailed. I started consulting with a forensic accountant, meticulously tracing the flow of funds through Ethan's various accounts. I learned about shell corporations, offshore investments, and other sophisticated techniques he had used to hide his ill-gotten gains. The accountant helped me compile a comprehensive report, detailing every fraudulent transaction and every instance of embezzlement. This report would be my smoking gun, the undeniable proof of Ethan's guilt. I also contacted a lawyer, seeking advice on how to navigate the legal complexities of the situation. I wanted to make sure that I was acting within the bounds of the law, and that I wouldn't be held liable for any of Ethan's crimes. The lawyer advised me to gather as much evidence as possible and to present it to the authorities in a clear and concise manner. She also warned me to be prepared for a lengthy and contentious legal battle. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. I spent countless hours poring over documents, interviewing witnesses, and coordinating with my team of experts. I barely slept, fueled by coffee and a burning desire for justice. The closer I got to the truth, the more paranoid I became. I knew that Ethan and my parents were watching me, trying to figure out what I was up to. They called me constantly, begging me to drop the investigation and to forgive Ethan for his mistakes. I played along, acting as if I was still conflicted and unsure of what to do. But inside, I was seething with rage, counting down the days until I could finally unleash my plan. One evening, as I was working late at my office, I received a strange phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted and menacing, warning me to back off and to leave Ethan alone. The caller threatened to harm me and my loved ones if I didn't comply. I hung up the phone, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that Ethan was behind the call, that he was desperate to silence me. I immediately contacted the police, reporting the threat and providing them with any information I had. They took the threat seriously and assigned a detective to investigate. I also hired a security team to protect myself and my family. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I was going to see this through to the end, no matter the cost. The day before I planned to present my evidence to the authorities, I received a message from my mother, begging me to meet her for lunch. She claimed that she had something important to tell me, something that would change everything. I was hesitant to go, suspecting that it was a trap, but I also knew that I couldn't afford to ignore her. I agreed to meet her at a small cafe in a neutral location, bringing my security team with me. As we sat down at the table, my mother looked pale and nervous. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling. "Aubrey," she said, "there's something you need to know about Ethan, something that I've been keeping secret for a long time." My heart skipped a beat. I had a feeling that whatever she was about to say would be a game changer. The person I trusted most was one of them. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. "Ethan isn't your biological son," she blurted out, the words hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. My mind struggled to process the information, the weight of it crushing me. She continued, explaining that years ago, in a moment of desperation and longing for a child, she had an affair. Ethan was the product of that affair, a secret she had guarded fiercely for decades. My father, the man who had raised Ethan as his own, had never known the truth. This revelation was a seismic shift, rewriting everything I thought I knew about my family. It explained so much: Ethan's sense of entitlement, my parents' blind adoration of him, the subtle differences in his features that I had never been able to place. It also gave me a devastating weapon, a truth that could shatter their world completely. Their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable, their carefully constructed lies impenetrable. But I now held the key to their destruction. I finished my lukewarm latte, feigning shock and dismay. "Mom, how could you keep something like this from Dad, from all of us?" I asked, masking the cold calculation that was now my guiding force. She sobbed, a pathetic display of remorse that I no longer found convincing. "I was afraid," she wailed. "Afraid of what your father would do, afraid of losing Ethan. I thought it was better to keep the secret buried." I nodded slowly, pretending to absorb her confession. I need time to process this, I said, standing up. I'll call you later. As I walked away, I could feel her eyes boring into my back. She had no idea that she had just handed me the final piece of the puzzle, the key to unleashing my carefully orchestrated plan. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. I finalized the arrangements with the authorities, providing them with all the evidence I had gathered, including the accountant's report and my mother's shocking confession. I also leaked the information about Ethan's true parentage to a tabloid newspaper, knowing that it would create a media firestorm that would engulf my family. The stage was set. The trap was ready. All that remained was to lure my prey into it. I called Ethan, feigning concern and offering him a chance to escape the consequences of his actions. I know what you've done, Ethan, I said, my voice filled with false sympathy. But I also know that you're not a bad person. I think I can help you get out of this mess, but you need to trust me. He hesitated, his voice laced with suspicion. What do you want me to do? I told him that I had a plan to help him disappear, to start a new life far away from his troubles. I would provide him with a new identity, a new passport, and enough money to get him started. But he had to meet me in a secluded location, a remote cabin in the mountains, where we could discuss the details in private. He agreed, his desperation overriding his caution. I knew that he was walking into a trap, a carefully crafted scenario that would expose his crimes and shatter his life forever. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The day Ethan drove up to that secluded cabin, the mountains echoed with the symphony of his downfall. He swaggered in, still clinging to a shred of his former arrogance, oblivious to the meticulously constructed trap closing around him. Before he could even settle, the cabin door swung open again, revealing not me, but two uniformed officers, their expressions grim. Behind them stood the forensic accountant and the private investigator, their presence solidifying the end of Ethan's charade. His face morphed from confusion to disbelief, to stark terror, as the officers read him his rights, the words echoing in the sudden silence. The accountant presented the irrefutable evidence of his financial wrongdoings, a paper trail leading directly to his shattered life. It was a scene ripped from a movie, but the horror etched on Ethan's face was undeniably real. As they led him away in handcuffs, the newspaper headlines I orchestrated hit the stands. Local businessman exposed, illegitimate son, financial fraud and family betrayal. The story detailed everything, from Ethan's birth secret to his theft. The fallout was immediate and devastating. My parents' carefully constructed world crumbled into dust. My father, the stoic patriarch, was shattered by the revelation of Ethan's true parentage and the scope of his financial manipulations. The shame and betrayal were too much to bear. He retreated into himself, a broken man haunted by the lies that had defined his life. My mother, once the picture of social grace, became a pariah, ostracized by her friends and neighbors. The country club memberships were revoked, the social gatherings ceased, and the whispers followed her everywhere she went. Their assets were frozen, their reputation ruined, and their family name dragged through the mud. They lost everything they had worked for, everything they had valued, and everything they thought they knew about themselves. The authorities, armed with my evidence and Ethan's forced confession, moved swiftly. He faced multiple charges of fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The trial was a media circus, a spectacle of greed, lies, and family dysfunction. Ethan tried to deflect blame, painting himself as a victim of circumstance, but the evidence was overwhelming. He was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to a lengthy prison term, his life irrevocably altered. I watched it all unfold from a distance, a ghost in the machine of their destruction. There were no tears, no cheers, just a profound sense of emptiness. The rage that had consumed me for so long slowly dissipated, replaced by a hollow ache. Seeing them suffer didn't bring me joy, but it did bring a sense of closure, a validation that their actions had consequences. They thought they were untouchable. They were wrong. I secured my father the medical care he needed, ensuring he was comfortable and cared for despite everything. I found him solace in his final days, a quiet understanding passing between us. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was acceptance. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. It's the acknowledgement that some wounds can only be healed by confronting the source of the infection, by excising the rot that threatens to consume everything. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.